Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Tescher. I'm the president and CEO of the Financial Health Network, and I'm so excited to kick off Fintech South with my colleague Franz Pasch from PayPal. The topic of this session is the business case for stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is a really popular topic these days, but PayPal has been talking about this and executing on this idea for 5 years now. It's really been a pioneer in this space. And so I'm going to facilitate a conversation with Franz to learn a little bit more about PayPal's journey, particularly 5 years in. So good morning. Welcome, Franz. You're the SVP of Corporate Affairs and Communications for PayPal. And I'm so excited to get to have this continuing conversation with you today.
Thanks, Jen.
So you joined PayPal just before the company broke off from eBay in 2015. And you've really played a critical role in helping to organize the company around a set of core values and to really be a purpose-driven business, not just through the mission statement on the wall, but also through your products, through your initiatives. You've really prioritized around a vision and a mission of financial health and financial inclusion. So tell us a little bit more about why PayPal, a digital payments company, chose to organize around this mission and how you're trying to deliver on it.
Great. Well, first, I want to thank Fintech South for having me and having PayPal participate in this conference. And also, I want to thank you, Jen, for your leadership and for all the work that the Financial Health Network has been doing to really lead the dialogue on what we think is one of the critical issues of our time. You guys have been thought leaders and great partners. So
thanks, Franz. It's a mutual fan club.
So let me go back to those days. It's been very interesting as we're in this dialogue right now. While so much changes in the air around the world about stakeholder capitalism, we did start this conversation within our company over 5 years ago, and we had a very interesting opportunity as we became an independent public company, a large public company. But when we separated from eBay and became independent, we had the opportunity to really look at our core capabilities, look at who we were, and to set a mission that we felt could really make a difference for our customers and for communities that we could serve. So we set as our North Star a mission to democratize financial services and e-commerce, to try to ensure that everyone in the world could be connected to the global economy, to the digital global economy, and could ultimately have access to financial services that had been really in the realm of the privileged. And that we felt that through our platform and of course, in partnership with organizations and with nonprofits and governments and others in our ecosystem, that we could really lead the charge to serve many communities, families, and businesses that hadn't been well served by the financial services system. When we set that mission, we also understood at the time that we needed to define our values in a way that would be mutually reinforcing with that mission. And so we set as our 4 values, and these came out of, again, sort of the core of PayPal and of our employee body and our mission. But our 4 values that we set were inclusion, which makes, which is completely reinforcing of democratizing financial services and serving underserved populations. And innovation, because we knew where there had to be new ways, and part of our roots as a tech company are really important to us as we start to innovate at scale. We also set collaboration as a goal. We knew we had to partner internally, but also across our ecosystem to make the kind of difference we wanted to make. And then finally, wellness. And at PayPal, wellness incorporates all of the things we associate with wellness, but also financial wellness. And we understood that we needed to think about financial wellness for our customers, but also for our employees. And that would be an important part of our journey. And so that was really the beginnings of this journey for us of how do we wrap together profit and purpose. How do we think about all of our stakeholders as we pursue this very ambitious mission? And we've really tried to stay on course.
So when I think about the many ills that our country faces, there's one person in particular who I often like to blame, and that's Milton Friedman. 50 years ago, Friedman
about
declared—
last week, 50 years ago, about last week or the
exactly,
week before. Yeah.
exactly. We're just at the anniversary that pretty much the only goal of business is to make money for shareholders. That's really the only purpose of business. And obviously, we're now seeing a rejection of that as more companies and leaders shift away from shareholder primacy to thinking about a multi-stakeholder perspective. And you just described that in your 4 pillars of your mission and vision. So you've talked a little bit about what you think PayPal's role is, but how do you think about the role of corporations more broadly as it relates to their customers, their employees, their communities? And do you think this is just like flavor of the day, particularly given this moment of COVID, or do you think this is a trend that we're going to see stick around?
I believe this is a trend that is going to be enduring. And I think that companies that are thinking about all of their stakeholders in times like this pandemic are learning that it actually can benefit all of their stakeholders. And I'll speak from our experience, but also I think it's, there are other companies experiencing this the same way as we are. If you think about the stakeholders that PayPal has, our employees are our most important stakeholder, and we feel that investing in our employees and really focusing on the wellness and the talent of our employees benefits all of our stakeholders. But we also know that our customers are a critical stakeholder for us, of course. Our investors and shareholders are a critical stakeholder. For PayPal, we're heavily regulated, and our governments, government officials, policymakers, regulators, very important stakeholders. And of course, our communities and sort of the larger society as a whole, as a company that serves 350 million people around the world, we think all the time about the sort of societal needs and the needs of communities and the needs of our overall world. So if you think about the pandemic and how a global company comes into a situation where everything changes, and how do you orient as to how to create, both stability for the company, how to continue to create value for all your stakeholders, how to continue to do what your stakeholders need. It's a very positive and useful way to think across those stakeholders as you go into a pressing and difficult situation like this pandemic. So in our example, for us, we focused on how we could preserve and ensure and maintain the health and safety of our employees, because we knew that was our highest priority right at the outset. And from there, we looked in how do we then help our customers who are going through a difficult time. We have small businesses and merchants and families who are struggling, and what are all the relief efforts that we could provide to help them weather through the pandemic. We reached out to governments and to regulators and said, how can we help? And that led to our engagement in things like the PPP program or stimulus checks. We also reached out to nonprofits, because we have a huge donation platform, and we have a lot of tools and capabilities to help nonprofits who went through a very difficult month in March and then really came back and needed to be able to do more fundraising than ever before, and they needed a good partnership. And then, of course, we looked to our communities. And as the pandemic played out, communities needed a huge amount of relief. And then there were overlaying events of the pandemic, or perhaps underlying events that then came to the fore, where we needed to get involved and to work on issues like racial equity and social justice, fighting fires in California, addressing the impacts of hurricanes on already vulnerable communities. So we went across the spectrum of our stakeholders, understanding that by working with each one created value for the other. And I think we can see that be mutually enforcing. And I think other companies had a similar experience in how to go through this period in a way that they were really creating value across that spectrum.
So now let's touch briefly on work you've been doing for each of those stakeholders that you've just talked about. Let's start with your employees. Before COVID, last year, you rolled out an employee financial wellness initiative. Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, and in particular, talk about how you measured the financial health of your employees to determine that there was work that needed to be done.
So just so our audience knows, Jen knows more about this subject than anyone. So it's a wonderful opportunity to have this conversation.
But knowing and doing are two different things, right? They're actually doing it. So go ahead, Franz.
Well, I mean, there's an interesting sort of saga to this. So we have been focused on financial health of our customers in an intense way for years. We've also, of course, been sensitive to what our employees need. But when about 2 years ago, when there were some real ups and downs in the economy, we created an employee relief fund to help employees who are facing a particular crisis or a sudden need, so that we would be able to help in those dire situations. And there are other companies who have done something similar, like Walmart or others. But what we then learned as we got into this was that what we had thought of would be critical, like some kind of really seismic change in a community or in a family, we were seeing requests for relief for things like a car broke down, or student loans were due, or a family was facing a different kind of medical bill that wasn't anticipated. And we realized that a lot of our employees were living paycheck to paycheck, and that they had there was a fragility to their financial security. And the reason that it was a bit of a surprise, and of course, when you look back, it shouldn't be a surprise, because we are the nations that we're in, and the economies of the countries we work in are reflected in our employees, but we pay at market or above market. So the market wasn't working, because we were, in almost every case, paying competitive wages or above competitive wages. And so we understood there were real gaps, and we started focusing on net disposable income and what was the difference between an employee's basic needs, what they would pay for, say, their rent and the food and the sort of the core things you pay, and what was left for the ability to save or to do certain things for your family or to take on different kinds of insurance. And we realized that net disposable income was too narrow. So we put in place a broad-based program, actually about a year ago, right about now, that addressed 4 pillars for our employees. And the first was that we made sure, and this addressed about a third of our employees who were either entry level, were working in our operations centers, were working in parts of the economy and in parts of the functions of our company where many of them were struggling to make ends meet. We made sure that everyone had stock. So we did a huge program to make sure that every employee at PayPal had stock and could benefit in the success of the company, and that was a way that they could also start to address wealth creation. We changed the cost of healthcare for our employees. Healthcare, and medical benefits can be a regressive tax. So the people who are making more money and the people making less money are paying the same in their medical fees. So that was a big change. We changed the cost of medical care for this portion of our employees by over 50%. And then we looked at wages and made sure we could adjust, and that everybody had appropriate wages, and we adjusted on that front. And then we created a financial education program that would enable people to get good help and advice and counseling, particularly if now you have stock and there are different, more net disposable income. And we've been able to move that net disposable income by 100%. And now net disposable income, at a minimum, we're at about 16%, and we're aiming for 20%. So I feel like we've been able to move the needle. This is an every year project, right? We have to keep at it and keep at it. And I think, we're on a journey with our employees and financial wellness, but we are really determined. And we're seeing more employees able to enroll in different kinds of benefits, increased usage of our benefits plans, of different programs like 401k. And we feel that we're moving the needle, and we're going to keep moving it.
Yeah. You're pioneering of this net disposable income metric as the way to both diagnose how your employees are doing and to hold yourself accountable. I think it's really important because pay, just, base pay compensation, paying a living wage, super important, but it only gets you so far in really understanding how your employees are faring. So, and you don't have to be a massive company like PayPal to be doing the kinds of things that you're doing and to be diagnosing. So, yeah. All right, we have.
And Jen, I should also add, and there's a true value here for our employees, but also for our partners, our customers, and our shareholders, that in this, you need inspired, committed employees to do what's needed for a company like ours that is serving such a diversity of customers, and to have employees who are not worried about financial security, but are completely focused on the mission, on innovation, on collaboration, on all of our values, and makes a huge difference. And ultimately, employees are the greatest asset of any company, and investing in your employees makes a difference for everyone.
Yeah, and a great way to recruit talent. Okay, I have to keep us moving because we have very little time left and a lot to talk about. Briefly, tell us about your partnership with US Treasury, with the Treasury Department, to help get stimulus checks out and also around Paycheck Protection Program loans.
Yeah. So, I reference this up front as, one of the ways in which we look to do our part to help during the pandemic. When we saw that the U.S. government was going to face a really urgent need to distribute funds to small businesses and then to consumers, we understood that fintech companies had a real role to play. And then we stepped up and worked really hard to work with the Small Business Administration and with the U.S. Department of Treasury to make sure that we could help to get those loans, the PPP loans, to actual small businesses. And, during that period, we were able to distribute $1.9 billion in loans to 66,000 small businesses, and the average loan was about $29,000. So it made a real difference, I think, and it showed again that fintech, going to the sort of subject of the conference, that fintech has a big role to play in being able to reach different parts of the economy. And this was a great example for that payout program. Also on stimulus checks, where, to be able to receive a stimulus check through PayPal, get it right away, or through another digital payments platform, is a very different experience and much more timely than something coming by mail, and people may not be at the address that they were at the last time. So it again showed, I think, a great value proposition. And this is very important overall for fintech as an industry, for governments and regulators to see the value proposition and to see the potential for us to make a difference. And it was a similar process in terms of our having to think, and other companies have to think, what can we do for Black-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses that were feeling the effects of the pandemic in far more extreme ways than many other parts of the economy. And so being able to sort of step up and make sure we could distribute to those businesses made a big difference.
Well, and that feeds into this next thing I wanted to talk about, which is this $530 million commitment that you've made to investing in and supporting Black-owned businesses in order to help close the racial wealth gap. We see lots of companies making statements. We see some making commitments. Yours is notable. Just tell us a little bit more about how you'll use that $530 million and ultimately why this is something PayPal should be getting involved in.
Well, our program really grew out of our mission and values and out of our engagement with minority communities and with small businesses, and in particular, Black and minority-owned small businesses. So we announced our program in June, but it grew out of a lot of the work we've done with a whole number of nonprofits and with small businesses. So our program, again, I seem to always be in fours today, but had 4 pillars. The first is that we knew we had to get cash out immediately to small Black-owned businesses on main streets all over the US that were really facing dire consequences and were struggling to survive. So we put $10 million into small grants between $5,000 and $10,000 and distributed them to over 1,200 small businesses right away. And we really focused on that because we knew that for each of these grants, we had an opportunity to do our part to save a small business. And we partnered with a wonderful nonprofit on this called AEO based in Washington. The next thing we focused on was how could we sustain and help Black-owned businesses in cities and communities around the country build their access to capital, find the technical support they needed, find the kind of long-term enduring support so that they could not only survive but thrive. So we partnered with 20 nonprofits that are expert and focused. And this is, again, part of what we've learned over time is that there's incredible expertise in the nonprofit community. And when the private sector and the nonprofit community can partner and also involve the public sector, it has a high degree of impact. So we've announced $5 million in those partnership loans. We then, we created an opportunity fund of $500 million that we are going to invest in Black-owned venture, in wealth creation in the Black community, and also to use our capital at Black-owned community banks. And that is underway. We've announced several of our grants already, and we'll have more announcements coming. And then because on that 4th pillar, because we are so focused on being sure that we can walk the walk externally and internally, and that the inside of PayPal and the outside of PayPal needs to be coherent and match, we're investing another $15 million in supporting our diversity and inclusion programs, our recruitment efforts, our partnerships with in talent development, and also all of our employee resource groups to make sure that they are sustained and that we can continue to do the hard work that's needed inside of PayPal.
So we could have this conversation for hours. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We did get one audience question, which was about the role of the CEO, like how important is tone at the top? And I would really encourage folks to check out the first episode of my new podcast, Emerge Everywhere. Dan Schulman was my first guest. And you can find that on any place where you subscribe for your podcasts. It's called Emerge Everywhere, and you'll get a real sense of how important the leadership role of the CEO is. So with that, Franz Pasch, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jen. And that podcast is terrific. Everyone should listen to Jen's podcast. All right.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.